Get out! You're no daughter of mine!
The one shouting at me with a voice loud enough to spit in my face is my mother. Her face is red with anger as she yells, and she's clutching a kitchen knife in both hands, its tip pointed at me.
I can't support a leech that doesn't even contribute to living expenses.
Not only do I not withhold the living expenses, but I also contribute over half of my income, which is $3,000, to the household every month. She knows this, and I've explained it to her numerous times, but nothing seems to get through to her now. Sure, she's lost her temper and refused to listen in the past, but I never thought she'd resort to wielding a knife. I'm careful not to provoke her further, keeping my distance to avoid getting hurt. Her icy words reached my ears. If I knew you'd become such a parasite, I would have never given birth to you. My name is Catherine, 29 years old. Thanks to my hard work, I now work as a systems engineer at a well-known major corporation. I was influenced by my father to pursue this career. He has always loved tinkering with computers. Ever since he was a child, he had a passion for machines, and the first time he saw a computer, he was utterly amazed. The computers back then were exciting, but the latest ones are just amazing. Look at this one, it's so thin, yet the display is so clear. Saying this with a smile, my father often took me, then a grade schooler, to electronics stores. He'd show me the newest computer models, pointing out their features and teaching me about them. Seeing father so enthusiastic about computers piqued my interest. My father, usually a man of few words, would always open up and teach me loads about computers. Soon enough, I realized I was better at using computers than most of my peers, which further fueled my desire to delve deeper. I went on to major in engineering in college. When job hunting, I naturally gravitated towards computer-related fields. Now, I work happily as a systems engineer at my current company. While most of my work is remote, I've achieved significant results compared to my peers. Occasionally, I'd visit my childhood home and chat about work with my father. Those were the good times. But one day, he suddenly collapsed. I got a call from my mother and rushed to the hospital.
Is Dad okay?
He just dropped. I called 911 right away. They started tests as soon as we got to the hospital. They said it seems to be a subarachnoid hemorrhage and he needs immediate surgery. He's in the operating room now. I just don't know how we're gonna get by from now on.
Oh no, Dad!
Hoping and praying for my father's safety, I waited. A few hours later, the doctor came out and updated us on his condition. While the surgery was successful, they said there might be lasting effects, like difficulty moving his limbs. At least he was alive. And for that, I was grateful. At my side, my mother remarked, I wonder how he's gonna manage work now. I'm worried if he'll ever be able to work like before. What am I supposed to do if our main source of income is gone? It was always like this with her. Always thinking of herself before anyone else. Seeing her like that just broke my heart even more. During my father's hospitalization, I noticed that he indeed struggled with his limbs, just as the doctor had warned. He worked hard in physiotherapy before his discharge, but it seemed the after-effects were here to stay. Throughout his hospital stay, my mother would drop off just the bare essentials for him and leave almost immediately. Considering his commute to his current job and his physical condition, he decided to retire early. Moreover, due to his need for constant care, I had a discussion with my mother about his future. With his condition, it's hard to live on his own, so I hope you can help take care of him, Mom. But I wasn't really expecting a response to begin with. I'm quite busy with various things, so I can't possibly take care of your dad. My mom dismissed the idea instantly. I felt disappointed. She was never the type to prioritize family, even when I was little. She always placed herself first. However, I believed that she loved my father and thought she would lend a helping hand now that he was in this condition. But my plea for her to help take care of him was rejected as well. That's the way it is, huh? Got it. In that case, I'll come live there and take care of Dad myself. That'd be a big help. When can you come? Since my job is primarily remote, I figured I could balance work and caregiving as long as I had a computer and a stable internet connection. I knew life would be tough balancing work, caregiving, and house chores, but I decided to move back to my parents' house for my beloved father. The day I moved back, while I was sorting out my belongings, my mom talked to me. Hey, about meals, make sure we can eat by 7 a.m., okay? It's good to have a balanced diet with grilled fish, salad, and stuff for breakfast, considering our health. And please make sure to put the garbage in small bags and take it out frequently. I hate any unpleasant smells. Also, we need to clean the house every day. Ah, I'm glad you came back home. When I decided to move back, she said she could take care of herself, but her attitude changed quickly, and she started to offload all the household chores onto me. However, despite her demands, I couldn't help but notice how dirty the house was. It seemed like she hadn't been doing house chores at all before. Sure enough, I ended up doing all the household chores by myself, while she did nothing. She wasn't even home most of the time, living her life as she pleased. I was swamped every day, juggling work, caregiving, and household chores. My slightly thinner father would say, "I'm sorry for causing you trouble. You have your job too." But I just shook my head slowly and smiled at him. "Don't apologize, Dad. It's not your fault. I'm glad I came back home. I enjoy talking with you." Hearing this, my father seemed a bit relieved. His condition wasn't so severe that he was bedridden or unable to eat by himself. I only had to assist him a little in his daily life, so it wasn't extremely tough, and I was happy to spend a lot of time with him, just like when I was a child. On the other hand, my mother, who did nothing, would still find things to complain about. "Catherine, your cooking is kind of bland and simple, isn't it? I wonder if Dad is getting enough nutrients from such a menu. For a sick man like your dad, don't you think you should add more variety to the meals? What a pity for parents to have such an undutiful daughter." She made these comments while gobbling down my cooking. However, since she brought up my father, I took her criticism seriously. Considering his age and reduced appetite, I thought it might be easier for him to eat if I prepared more small dishes rather than big platters. With this in mind, I increased the number of dishes, but my mother didn't say anything. Instead, a few days later, she commented, "The meals recently have too many dishes. Your dad and I are old, we can't eat this much. You've been living alone until now, don't you know how to save money?" While she was clearing her plate, I couldn't help but retort, "It's not that you told me to add more side dishes for dinner. I'm just preparing more small bowls so that Dad doesn't get tired of the food and to stimulate his appetite." Then, Mom let out an obvious sigh and stood up from her seat. "What an attitude! It's as if I've been nagging and you're doing it reluctantly. That's so patronizing. I can't believe it. You take every little opinion as a complaint, that's why you're still not married." Expressing her anger with her whole body, Mom stomped her way to the sofa in front of the TV. Of course, the dishes were left on the table just as they were. Mom, now sitting heavily on the sofa, looked straight at me and yelled just one word. "Coffee." I thought to myself, who does she think is going to make it for her, as I cleaned up the table. Then Mom threw a cushion at me from the sofa. "Come on, hurry up and make the coffee. You're almost always home and not going to work. You say you're taking care of Dad, but I bet you're just after his retirement money. And yet, you don't even do the housework properly. You're really unreasonable." "Not this talk again. I've told you, I've switched to working from home. When I'm in my room, I'm in meetings or working." No matter how I explained it, Mom refused to understand anything about working from home. In her mind, I had apparently moved back home under the pretense of caregiving, not contributing to living expenses, and was a disappointment to my parents. In reality, I am the one taking care of Dad, so why does she think I have access to and am misusing his retirement money? At the end of the day, it's me who's taking care of Dad, earning money for my parents' living expenses, and doing all the housework. I've been swung around by Mom's whims since I was little, but I've reached my limit. I feel bad for Dad, but I can't live with the three of us in this house any longer. A few days after making up my mind, I accompanied Dad to his physical therapy. He has the will to do it, and although we can't expect dramatic improvements, at least he's not getting worse. The doctor encouraged us to keep up the good work. When we returned home, we crossed paths with Mom, who was hurriedly leaving the house with big bags in hand. It's not unusual for Mom to be out of the house, and she often comes back with big bags from department store shopping sprees, so I didn't think much of it. However, the next day, when I finally decided to go shopping and opened my closet, I realized all my cherished bags and accessories were gone. What? Why? I don't wear them all the time, and I haven't changed their location, so they should definitely be here. Suddenly, I recalled the image of my hurried mother from the previous day, and with a hunch, I confronted her. "Mom, did you go into my room yesterday?" What's with the sudden question? In the first place, this is my house, and I'm free to enter any room I want. Then what's in that bag? Mom was holding a bag from a high-end brand. It was clearly something she bought today. "You sure have the money to buy luxury items. You're always telling me not to waste money." "That's right. Since you waste money, I had you compensate for it." Confused by her words, I furrowed my brows, and Mom started laughing gleefully.
You had some pretty good bags, didn't you? Even just the bags and accessories amounted to a good sum of money.
Mom had sold my accessories without my permission and used the money to buy things for her hobbies. I was furious and shouted,
"What's this? I can't believe it. You stole and then sold them. That's worse than a thief. Give them back. Pay me back."
Then Mom twisted her face like a demon and yelled,
"I can't believe my own daughter is talking back to her mother. When I was a child, I absolutely obeyed my parents. I worked for my parents, I took care of them. And yet, you do nothing but complain."
And she hit the table with all her might.
"Then why don't you help take care of Dad for once? Hey Mom, do you remember ever taking care of him since I came back? Who prepared his clothes for changing? Who supported his chair when he stood up? You don't even do that much, and you say you're taking care of him. You're the one being taken care of the most in this house."
Unable to hold back any longer, I too slammed my hands down on the desk, glaring at my mother. She had a bad relationship with my paternal grandmother, and I've heard she was treated harshly, similar to what you might call harassment from the mother-in-law. I couldn't say anything about that, but the one thing I couldn't accept was her claiming she was taking care of my father. My father had given up on receiving care from my mother long ago. Still, he tried his best to engage in small talk, bringing up topics from TV shows or stories he heard from friends during rehab. But as soon as my father would start talking, my mother would swiftly disappear from the scene. I wondered how she could say she was taking care of him so confidently when she wasn't doing anything. While I was lost in thought, my mother remained silent. Slowly, she took her hands off the desk, turned her back to me without saying a word, and headed toward the kitchen. Is she just going to give me the silent treatment and run away from this discussion? I thought, sighing. Unexpectedly, my mother returned quickly. She approached briskly, holding a kitchen knife in both hands. "Mom." Her face, now turned a deep red, was like nothing I'd ever seen before. My mother, shaking with anger, yelled at me in a voice louder than I had ever heard from her.
"Get out of this house! You parasitic leech, living here just waiting for your father's retirement funds."
In that moment, I realized none of my words had reached her at all. To my mother, no matter how much I cared for my father or how much I worked, I was nothing more than a pest. "I'll find a new place and leave as soon as possible." I slowly backed away, saying this while creating distance between us. Seeing that my mother didn't move, I rushed into my room. I thought I wouldn't feel anything being rejected by such a distant mother, but tears wouldn't stop flowing from my eyes. Not from sadness. From intense anger. I immediately sprang into action. I started preparing to move out that very day. I consulted a colleague at work who had a friend in real estate, and they helped me out. During my free time, I packed my belongings into cardboard boxes. Finding a new place didn't take long. Thanks to the help of my colleague. Once everything was ready for the move, I talked to my father. "Dad, can we talk for a bit?" "What's wrong?" I told my father everything about how my mother had treated me. "That's terrible. I had noticed something was off with your mom's attitude, but I felt like I was causing you both trouble and found it hard to speak up. I'm sorry." "It's not your fault, Dad. In fact, I have something on my mind too. When I was well, she pushed all the housework onto me, cleaning, laundry, cooking, you name it. It was like I was her housekeeper. On top of that, she would always come to me for money, and it was troubling me as well." My father continued. "Even now, when I need care, she only tends to Catherine and doesn't lift a finger to help her daughter. I'm really disappointed in your mom's behavior. So, I've actually been thinking about getting a divorce." "I see. You've been through a lot too, Dad." "No, compared to what you've been through, it's nothing. Really, thank you. Actually, Dad, being able to come back home and live with you has been the happiest thing for me. And I meant it from the bottom of my heart. I wanted to stay with my father. From now on, too. Dad, there's something I want to talk to you about. Aware of my father's feelings toward my mother, a plan had formed in my mind. I shared it with him. A few days later, we decided to move out while my mother was away. She was out every Wednesday, from morning to after lunch, attending her hula dance classes and having lunch with her friends, returning after 3 p.m. We arranged for the movers to come on a Wednesday morning when we were sure she wouldn't be home. They loaded our belongings onto the truck. As I realized this was my last time in this house, I felt a pang of sadness. I got into the rented car. I wasn't alone. My father was with me. Since both of us wanted to get away from my mother, we decided to move out and live together, just the two of us. In the car, my father spoke.
Catherine, was this the right choice? You could have taken this chance to free yourself from the burden of taking care of me. Don't say that, Dad. I want to live with you. That's my greatest happiness. Let's work hard together from now on.
Thank you. The move was over by the afternoon, and we sat down to eat the takeout lunch we bought, chatting away. Sorry about today, we didn't have much time, so it's just convenience store lunch boxes. I remember those. I used to eat them often before Catherine came back. Couldn't find the time to cook because of work. Your mom always had something to say about it, though. Dad laughed as he said this. Even such simple conversations made the meal taste delicious. After taking a break, we started to unpack and settle in when the phone rang. It was from Mom. I picked up and switched to speakerphone so Dad could hear. Hello?
Why are you two suddenly gone?
I could tell Mom was freaking out over the phone.
Why are both your and Dad's things gone? What does this mean?
Dad and I decided to move out together. It was a good time since you told me to leave anyway. Is there a problem? You don't have to worry about caregiving or living expenses anymore.
What am I supposed to do about my living expenses without Dad? I'm relying on his pension and retirement fund. Where are you now?
Why don't you handle your own affairs? We're already in our new place. I won't tell you where, but we bought a condo in a high-rise condo.
What? A condo in a high-rise? That's where rich people live. Don't joke around, there's no way you two can afford that.
Mom clearly didn't believe us, but it was the truth. We had moved to a high-rise condo as close as possible to the hospital where Dad was receiving treatment. I've said this many times before, but I have a steady job. You called it a side job, but the company I work for is quite large, and I've been working there long enough to be entrusted with significant responsibilities. You might not remember, but the $3,000 I put into the account every month was from me, not Dad. What? I thought that was Dad's pension. The balance is high because of his retirement fund, right? Dad's salary was never that high, right? And the retirement fund? It was gone the month after he received it. I saw the credit card statement. It was all spent on designer bags, so it must have been you who used it up. That's why I've been supporting the family.
I didn't know. No one told me anything.
Explaining further seemed pointless, so I continued. It's not that you weren't told, you just didn't want to listen. I've told you many times. Besides, Dad told me about it. Even though he was working and you were at home, you were always out playing with friends. He said your spending habits were so bad that he had to manage the finances. And when you couldn't go out and play as you liked, you went around calling him a male chauvinist. Yet now all you can think about is money.
Catherine, you deceived me knowing all this. If you have so much money, come back home right now.
For Mom, family seemed to be just a wallet. She never worried about Dad's condition, only about money. Yet, she was sloppy with managing the bank book and thoughtlessly used the credit card without seeing any issues. I was utterly astounded at how she had managed to live her life this way. Dad, growing impatient with the endless conversation, took over. I thought you might listen if it was our daughter talking, but I was wrong. We've been together a long time, and for that, I thank you. From now on, you can live your life however you want, and I won't interfere. Let's get a divorce.
Divorce? Wait, what about my living expenses?
Without me, you can live freely. I'll send the divorce papers later, just sign them. She truly was a person who could only think of herself. As I stood there in disbelief, Dad hung up the phone without saying another word. "I'm sorry for making you feel bad." With just those words, my father spoke, and I replied, "Thank you, Dad." The next day, we were scheduled to go to the hospital for my father's appointment.
I never thought I'd get to live in such a convenient place. Catherine, thank you.
I just thought it'd be better for you to have an easier life, Dad. Plus, living here is so much cheaper than living in a downtown high-rise, so it seems like we'll be able to live more comfortably. With that, we left the house. In about 10 minutes, we arrived at the hospital. The automatic doors at the entrance opened, and we were taken aback. My mother was sitting on a chair near the entrance. She had apparently been waiting for us since the morning. As soon as she saw us, she stood up briskly, as if she had been waiting, and walked toward us.
What was that phone call yesterday all about? I haven't heard anything about your salary or about you leaving with Dad. I won't allow you two to live in a nice place just by yourselves.
Suddenly, my mother's hand reached out to me. She grabbed me and said,
"Let me live in the high-rise too."
Even then, I was past being angry and could only maintain my calm. Why does she think she can get her way by talking like this? Realizing she hasn't thought about our family at all, I even started to feel sorry for her.
We've decided this just between Dad and me. Please give up. I've decided to no longer think of you as my mother. Thank you for everything until now. But from now on, please let me live my own life. I won't allow that.
I don't need your permission. Now, let go of my hand. This is a hospital. If you don't stop, I'll call the police. Then, regaining a bit of her calm, my mother finally looked around. The other patients were glancing over at us. People who seemed to be hospital staff were walking toward us, accompanied by a security guard. Panicking, my mother released her grip on me. "Is everything all right here?" Without looking at the person who spoke, my mother hurriedly left.
I apologize for the commotion. That was my mother. We had a bit of a disagreement,
I said, looking at the entrance of the hospital, where I could see my mother's back. She seemed weaker than usual. In the days following, my mother seemed to stake out the hospital and look around for us. But she only acts assertively towards people she perceives as weaker than herself. After being chased out by security guards and shouted at by other assertive patients calling her a suspicious person, she stopped showing up. That day at the hospital was the last time I ever saw my mother. Afterward, my father consulted a lawyer and began working in earnest to get a divorce. My mother was not enthusiastic about the divorce until the very end, making a fuss and even demanding alimony. After being patiently explained what alimony is by the lawyer, she realized she wasn't in a position to receive any. She tried to cry and beg to the lawyer, saying she couldn't live on her own, but the lawyer coolly referred her to the local government's financial assistance and support centers, and proceeded with the process. Finally, a few months after the incident at the hospital, the divorce was finalized. My father decided to sell the house since he no longer needed it. My mother was strongly opposed to losing the house, but the moment she learned she would receive money from the property division even after the divorce, she completely changed her tune. Her attitude, readily agreeing and even raising her hands in approval, made her seem like a stranger to me. Just a money grubber until the end, we sighed in unison. After my father sold the house, we've been enjoying a more peaceful life. I've been busy as usual with work, housekeeping, and caregiving, but caregiving services are much more substantial here than in our previous neighborhood, and I've been able to go to work more often with the help of daytime caregivers. Meanwhile, my father's condition has gradually progressed, partly due to aging. The doctor suggested considering moving him to a care facility, and we are currently pondering our options. Just when we were getting used to this life, I received a call from an unknown number. Thinking it might be work-related, I answered, only to hear my mother's voice. "Catherine, I've almost run out of savings. It's been just a few months since we sold the house, but it seems like the savings are nearly gone. So, could you give me a little money? Think of it as your final act of kindness to your mother. I don't have any more money to give you. I'm living happily with Dad now. Can you please just leave us be?"
Leave you be? How dare you talk to your mother like that? Giving me money should be no big deal for you, Catherine. What's the point of working at a good company if you can't even pay back your mother?
Please, don't contact me again. I was too tired even to argue. With that, I hung up the phone. Later on, I blocked her number, but she kept changing hers and calling back. It seems my mother, initially unaware of the call blocking feature, eventually realized she could reach me by using a different phone. I kept blocking every new number she called from, but it was like a never-ending game of whack-a-mole. Finally, I changed my own number, and that put a stop to the calls. Afterward, through some mutual acquaintances, my dad heard bits and pieces about my mom. After her savings ran out, she was living in a rundown apartment in the suburbs. My mom, who had never worked before, was scraping by with a part-time job. She couldn't afford any luxuries and was just barely managing to live on her own.
It seems she's finally learned to stand on her own 2 feet.
Dad commented.
I might have spoiled her too much.
I quietly muttered.
I think you're right.
And listened as Dad sighed deeply. Are you happy now? I asked him. Smiling at me, he replied.
Of course, I am. Thank you, Catherine. I'm sorry for all the trouble I've caused you.